to you.
KCCA has taken a number of steps to address this sanitation challenge, which include, but not limited to the following: the setup,
Welcome to Slam Dunk Basketball Talk.
A wise man once said, "The future has a name, and its name is hope. A tiny flicker of light that feeds on hope is enough to shatter any shield of darkness." At Mandulus, we really believe.
Engineered in the heart of the Pearl, one face, four perspectives, embracing a hip, urban and dynamic community, keeping dibs on the constantly evolving African scene, fanning the hottest talent in Uganda and beyond, inspiring beautiful minds across the world, literally changing the game on television. This is XXL TV Show Season 4. Go big or go home. Otherwise, be inspired.
Good morning or good afternoon from your sitting room. This is XXL Season 4, and particularly on the book review. Today I'm going to be talking to the gentleman who is well known to most of you, and the gentleman who I would say, in my own opinion, shaped the media landscape in Uganda after the 1986. The gentleman known as Mr. William Pike is on the show today to talk about the book that I think is the greatest book so far at the moment in Uganda, and of course the book that rhymes most of the books written, telling the story of Uganda before the 1986 and perhaps after the 34 years. William Pike, in his book, talks about some very intimate stuff and as well as some very difficult moments of the history of Uganda and as a country. Let's dive into it, and William, welcome to the show.
Thanks for bringing me on, Eddie.
You're welcome. How are you?
I'm good.
Tell me about your flight from Nairobi to Kampala.
Well, I haven't tried tried Uganda Airlines yet. I must try it. I normally come on Jambo Jet, and it's fine. I come every month to Uganda to check on Capital Radio. Yeah. So I'm still around.
Okay, so you haven't flown Uganda Airlines. But did you fly the Uganda Airlines, the original Uganda Airlines?
Flew Uganda Airlines in the old days.
Yes.
And I think even in the book, there's a story of how when I moved to Uganda, which was in, I think, June 1986. Yeah. So I'd been covering the Bush War before then. but I actually moved and came to work at New Vision full-time in June 1986. We went on Uganda Airlines Boeing 707 from Gatwick, and then we got all the way over Sudan, and then some part of the plane broke down, so we had to go back to Gatwick.
Whoa.
And
From Sudan?
from Sudan all the way back, which is like 3/4 of the way to Uganda.
Yeah.
And we went all the way back to Gatwick, and it was a pretty, it was more like a matatu than a plane. And I think that's that plane that eventually crashed in Rome in, I can't remember when that was, 1989 or 1990. So that's how, but that's the last time I flew Uganda Airlines. But I look forward to flying the new Ugandan Airlines.
Okay. What do you think of the Ugandan airline of today versus the Ugandan airline of the old days?
Well, it's too early to comment, but my one concern is it's so difficult to make money running an airline. South African Airlines is effectively bankrupt. Kenya Airways, the government Kenya Airlines is requesting the government to nationalise it. Rwanda Air survives on subsidies from the state, substantial subsidies. Ethiopian Airlines is the most profitable and successful African airline.
Yeah.
Ethiopia is a highly disciplined country, so I don't think you have a problem in Ethiopia training pilots, and then they go to work for Emirates. It's a challenge, and I hope Uganda Airlines succeeds. I'm sure they can succeed with short-haul regional flights.
Yeah.
The challenge is doing long-haul international flights. That can be very expensive and challenging.
Yes, and I think we're bringing about 3 or 4 planes, to that effect, right? Well, you have heard from William the experience of flying Uganda Airlines back in the days. So let's dive into this very long awaited for moment of the combatants, the memo of the Bush War in Uganda and the press in Uganda. What a title!
Well, the title comes from the NRA song, which you can find on YouTube if you want to listen to it.
They fought a Bush war, heavy and encouraging, until when the blood was shed for Ugandans. Fellow combatants and patriots in the struggle, our country Uganda must be free.
They gave their lives so that Uganda could be free. So it's that you can listen to that song on YouTube, and that's where the song came from.
All right, and so you decided that the title of the book came from, and anything particularly that drove you to it?
If you listen to those songs in those days, and I think this is what it's very difficult for people to imagine. Even the Bobby Wine followers, it's difficult for them to imagine. But this Bush War struggle was in some ways selfless. It was genuinely patriotic. Of course, there were mistakes and flaws, and people are human. So people are not saying they were perfect, but it was genuinely motivated by feelings of sacrifice and patriotism, which is why those songs, something like that song, Fellow Patriots and Combatants in the Struggle, that's why it captures that mood, and so that's why I wanted to use it. And actually, the people who follow Bobby Wine and think we need a change and blah blah, they might actually find that they knew more about this the NRA struggle, that they actually somehow identify with it and sympathize with it. It's not so different.
So they're cold.
Well, everyone desires a better world, a more progressive society. The conditions, of course, then were terrible. I mean, at least between 1971 and 1986, at least 500,000 Ugandans died. it was a much more terrible time than it is today. So you can't, in that sense, you can't compare the Bobby Wine followers with the NRA.
You have had the part that William talks about, the beginning, the title of the book, the song and the struggle and what is going on right now in the country. But William, let's get a little bit more specific to the book itself. Why the book?
What happened was that in around 1988, a British publisher asked me to write a book. And so I submitted the book in around 1991, but it was too detailed about Ugandan politics for the British publisher. And then I submitted it to a local publisher here, but the local publisher wanted to change it. I didn't want to change it very much. So then it sat in a drawer. And then about 3 years ago, I thought, no, it can't just sit in a drawer. So I wrote a final chapter. The first 14 chapters are really about up to 1993 or 92. And I wrote a last chapter about how President Museveni decided to lift term limits, about how I left New Vision, my final thoughts on the Bush War, was it worth it? To what extent had Uganda been transformed? There was a question when we were in the book, there's a theme. First time I went to visit Uganda was in the Luwero Triangle, when the Bush War was at its murderous height. The second time I went to visit was the so-called liberated zone in western Uganda. And in Masaka, I stayed with the headquarters of Salim Saleh. And then one day we were driving, he was taking me to, we were going to see something, he was showing something. And as we were driving along at Murum Road somewhere, Saleh said, "Is this a revolution? You know, this is the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution." So I was a bit nonplussed and struggled to answer the question. But actually, I tell that story at the beginning of my chapter on Western Uganda, the liberated zone in 1985. And then at the very end of the book, I come to answer the question, which in my view, it was a revolution, but not like the Bolshevik revolution in 1917 in Russia, but more like there was some revolutions in 1848 in Europe, which were essentially middle-class revolutions. And they restored the rights of human rights and voting rights and property rights and stabilized society without radically transforming society. And so I said, yes, I think it was a revolution, but that kind of revolution, like the 1848 revolutions in Europe. So, you know, Uganda is transformed, and Uganda is a better place now as a result of what happened in the Bush War, in my view.
So, you say that moment with Salim Saleh, and a question comes to mind. What drove you from, first of all, how did you even how did you get to be in Uganda and to be in the middle of this war, and from a journalist who was doing his stuff in the UK to get into Uganda and finding yourself to the bush? What was the interest?
I also explain the circuitous path that led me to Uganda in the book. But I was born in Tanganyika, as it was then, in 1952, where my father was a colonial officer. And then when I was older, we went back to England and I went to school in England. But I always retained, you know, a feeling or something for Africa. And then in my 20s, when I became a journalist, if you're a journalist, it's always much better to write about something that interests you and which you have, where you want to develop a deep understanding. So I started writing about Africa. Then I went to be a foreign correspondent in Tanzania in 1982. And Tanzania at that time was also in a very hopeless economic state. And it was rather depressing. and it was very difficult to work or live in Tanzania in those days. So I came back to the UK and went to do a Master's in African Studies at the School of Oriental and Africa Studies. And there I met a mature PhD student who happened to be a Ugandan exile called Ben Matogo.
Yeah.
And we started talking, and I was telling him about Tanzania, and he was talking about the problems of Africa. And then it turned out he was the London representative of the NRA, NRM.
You didn't know about this?
No, I didn't. No, he was just a guy. It was just like, I'm having a coffee in the coffee bar. This guy's having a coffee there. Hi, how are you? Get chatting. Then we used to meet up in the coffee bar. So it became a personal relationship, and then I discovered these things.
Okay.
And then to cut a long story short, journalists always want to get a big story. There was all these rumors of atrocities in the Luwero Triangle. There was a so-called guerrilla group, or were they bandits? It was a big story. No one knew exactly what was going on. So other journalists were also trying to go, but eventually I ended up being the journalist that was taken to the bush by the NRA, which was, I think, looking back, the greatest formative experience of my life.
Okay. And tell me about your first experience meeting President Yoweri Museveni.
Well, to get to see Museveni was a real struggle, because I got a phone call one day in London, come to Nairobi now. I said, I can't come now, but I'll be there in a week.
Yes.
So I got to Nairobi, met Katagaya. Katagaya sent me to Entebbe, stay in the Lake Victoria Hotel. Someone will come and greet you and say, are you EK's friend? So Aston Kajara came and said, are you EK's friend? I said, yes. Then it took a week to get me into the bush, through a lot of hassles, getting caught in roadblocks. The younger generation won't remember what it was like, but it was super dangerous in Kampala. Much more dangerous being in Kampala than being in the bush with the NRA.
Wow.
No one was outside after 6 o'clock. Everyone was in. If you were outside after 6 o'clock, you were a security operative or something, an army person. It was really scary, incredibly dangerous. Eventually, they decided I had to walk out, because it wasn't possible to drive me out because of all the difficulties. A guy called Bob Kagoro, who was the manager of Total, was the head of the cell that was taking care of me, the 3-man cell. So I stayed at his house in Kasubi. And then one night we walked out from Kasubi, walked through the dark, walked to Nansana, where there was a little camp, NRA camp hidden in a coffee bush. Picked up 5 NRA people. I walked out with one person, picked up 5 guys in Nansana. Then from there we walked to what was called Black Bomber Camp, which was commanded by Chaligonza.
This is the current Matayo Chaligonza, the cantankerous old man. Yes,
the man with problems on his
Yes.
So, I mean, he's a tough guy. Yeah. So he was the commander of the...
Was it tough then?
Well, he was commanding the nearest NRA camp. I mean, this was a camp with hundreds of soldiers, or very near Matuga in a forest. So that's close, that's the front line.
Yes.
So then we picked up another, we got there at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Then they let me sleep till about 3 or 4 o'clock. Then they woke me up. I was staying in one of these tents they call Mamengina, Ingia, Pole Pole.
Yes.
Tents in a little grass shelter. Then we walked from there to a big camp called Mondland, commanded by Tinyifuza.
This is the current Sejusa, David Sejusa.
Yes. Sejusa, yes.
Okay.
But he wasn't called that then. And that was a big camp with maybe 1,000 men. Stayed there for a bit, then continued walking through the night. All of this time, from Black Bomber, the Matuga camp. So there was in Black Bomber, we picked up 30 soldiers,
Yes.
so like a whole platoon to protect me.
Okay.
But there was one person who took care of me personally, who was Kale Kayahura,
Oh,
who was also called Edward in those days.
yes.
So, and in the dark, so we walked all through, the second night we walked all through the night, going through ruined buildings, through matoke plantations. And because I was used to living in the city, in London,
Yes.
my night vision was very poor. So I walked for kilometers and kilometers, holding
Kale.
Kale's hand like a little child.
Wow.
And then I got very, very, very tired. And I kept saying, when are we getting there? When are we getting there? He said, oh, no, we'll soon get there. We'll soon get there. So then we walked on, and then we got out of the forested part of Luwero and into the grasslands in Bulumezi. So something like, that must, yeah, so after about 2 days,
Yes.
just almost 2 days, we reached Museveni's camp, the headquarters of Mobile Brigade, having walked something like 110 kilometers.
Yes.
And I was wrecked. And then the next morning, they took me to see Museveni.
All right. So tell me something. In the book, you happen to be the first journalist, if I'm not mistaken, and foreign journalist to ever see Museveni in his camp.
Yeah, I think that's, there was actually another journalist who went in, so there were 3 journalists who visited the NRA in the bush, actually 4 journalists, I think. The first one was called Tom Lansner, who was the Reuters correspondent, and he's still a friend of mine. He was an American journalist.
Okay.
And he went just to the Matuga area with Katagaya in about September 1981, very soon up. But they just hid in the bushes and they didn't really do very much, but they were very small. At that time, there were probably only 100 or 200 soldiers in the NRA. It was a tiny group. Then in 1982, the NRA overexpanded with hindsight and created a liberated zone in Luwero. But that, if you follow the law of guerrilla warfare, you shouldn't take territory that you can't defend.
Yes.
And they tried to set up a liberated zone, and that was actually a disaster because it allowed the UNLA to attack fixed positions.
Yes.
And the NRA didn't, suffered a lot of setbacks at that period. But a journalist called Hans Germani from Germany went to that liberated zone, or that controlled area, whatever you call it, at that time. But he never really did a proper write-up of it. So although he went, people don't really know about it.
Yes.
Then I went there in 84, July, August 84. And then in 1985, after they opened the second front in the Ruwenzori Mountains, Tim Cooper and Alison Porteous, who are still around Uganda sometimes, they went and did some TV programs in, I think at the end of 85, end of 84, beginning of 85.
Yes.
So those are the only journalists who ever properly visited NRA in the bush.
But they never met Museveni particularly.
No, I don't think they did. No, they didn't do interviews and all of that stuff with Museveni.
Okay, so let's talk about you meeting Museveni at that point. But point for you to actually note is that 1984, I was, I think, 2 years old or 1 year old or something like that. So you can imagine the contrast when I sit to actually interview William right now, and this is a story of so many Ugandans as well. Let's get into a commercial break, and when we come back, William will tell us the story of how he met Museveni the first time, and I would like to know what happened, and you will definitely be blown away. Welcome back to the show. This is the book review on XXL Season 4. On the hot seat today is actually the senior citizen, Mr. William Pike. You all know him. So William, meeting Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the fearless man, for the first time, what was running in your mind at that moment when you appeared and said, finally I'm here and this is Museveni, the guy I've been looking for?
Of course, it was very exciting because actually that was the journey. You're picking up information about the NRA, but
You found it exciting, William? Not scared?
scared and being exciting. I mean, two sides of the same coin. Really.
Yes, yes.
Obviously, as a journalist, to
Yes.
get the interview Museveni was a big thing, and it would be a centerpiece of any article that I wrote in the British papers, because I'd come there to write this story for the Observer newspaper, which is a Sunday newspaper, one of the two big Sunday newspapers in England.
Yeah.
And so I was very excited. I got a bit irritated because I'd gone all the way this way with them. Then they were taking me to meet Museveni, and they started patting me, checking my bags. I thought, why are they doing this?
I mean, I've been with you all this time.
Anyway, there was a bit
Yes.
of, so we went through that bit of security. Of course, nothing like the security Museveni has today.
Yeah.
And so then that must have been about maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. So Museveni was sitting outside so all the soldiers stayed in little grass thatch.
Mama ingia pole pole.
Yes, exactly. But his was bigger and it had more like a hut with straight walls.
Yes.
So, because he was the commander-in-chief.
Chief, yes.
And, or actually not, what he was called then is chairman of the High Command.
Okay.
And so he had a little stick bench, made of sticks lashed together outside his hut. And there was one for me to sit on, and then there were a couple of other benches, I think, where he used to meet his commanders. So I got there, got out my tape recorder, got ready to interview him. And then he said, no, hold on. Tell me about yourself.
Typical President Museveni, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So he's really, in many ways, he hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And so then we did that, and then I did my interviews, which went on for many hours. So I stayed with him until maybe 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening.
Wow, from 10 o'clock.
In the morning, yeah.
Wow.
So we did lots of interviews, but then after we started talking about, so he told me about his history, who he was, the NRA struggle, politics, blah, blah. Saying he was completely confident. That was the very striking thing at the time. He said, if we had 3,000 rifles, I can't remember the exact numbers, it's in the book, 3,000 more rifles, AK-47s, 1 million rounds of ammunition, and some mortar shells, we could capture power immediately.
Wow.
And when he said it, he wasn't really boasting. Sometimes people say, I'm the greatest person.
Yeah.
But when he said it, you felt, actually, somehow this sounds true or plausible.
Yes.
Actually, and it was that self-confidence, that
Yes.
incredible self-confidence,
Yeah.
which is based, I think, it was based on a profound understanding of the political conditions inside Uganda at that time, plus his understanding of military tactics and strategy.
Yes.
So it wasn't a wild boast. I think it was a reasonable assessment.
Okay.
Because indeed, it was only a year and a half later that he did capture power. So there wasn't such a big gap.
Okay.
But anyway, I did the interview, talked to him for a long time. All the time he was there, he had a second person to cross-check, I think, what I was saying, and so he could discuss, what did you think of that person, Pike? Do you think he's genuine?
Yes.
So the other person...
So there was a person doing a personality
so the other
check.
person was sitting there with his cap pulled over his head.
Yes.
So Museveni was on his bench, then this person was sitting with his back to a tree, like this, with his cap over his head, so you couldn't see his face. Or when I took pictures, his face wouldn't be showing.
Yes.
And that was Mugisha Muntu.
Wow.
Who was
Yes,
sort of blue-eyed boy.
Yes,
70
and then the
at that
fact-finding,
time,
yes.
was very close and was doing intelligence stuff for
yes,
Museveni.
yes.
The reason he was hiding his face was he didn't want his family to get in trouble. And as you know, his family were prominent UPC people
Yes.
in Bushenyi.
Yes.
So he was trying. He wasn't being secretive. He was just trying to protect his family.
Okay.
So, and then I got into a very long argument with Museveni because at that time I was for a magazine called South in London.
Yes.
So I was doing a lot on business and how to run economies in developing countries, and Museveni had this idea for an exchange rate with 16 different rates.
Yes.
For the Uganda shilling.
Yes.
If you're importing a wig or cosmetics, you pay a high, you get a bad exchange rate. If you're buying a car, you get a bad exchange rate. But if you're importing essentials, you get a good exchange rate. And I was saying to him, this is unworkable because you know, how do you regulate it? And it's much better just to have a single exchange rate and then put a tax on wigs and cars.
Yes.
Anyway, he's very argumentative, Museveni, and he will never admit he's wrong. And then, not on this case, but on other cases later, after I came to Uganda, I found often you'd argue with him, and then a few days later, you'd hear him having changed his position on something. So he internalizes it.
Yes.
But anyway, what I realized...
Which is actually a good thing for a leader, to always take in information and internalize it.
Yes.
And make changes.
Yes.
Because if you just stuck to it and you don't change, you tend to have a problem. Yes.
So I realized, and the following day I also spent a good part of that day with him. So that day and a half I spent with Museveni, eating with him, talking with him, spending time with him. I realized he was really a remarkable person with a very powerful intellect and a very interesting vision of what could happen in Uganda and how Uganda could be reformed and rebuilt.
Yes. He had quite a very interesting ideas on how you can inform Uganda and take Uganda, reform Uganda and take Uganda to forward. What did you pick from Museveni at that point? Was he real about this stuff?
Yeah, very real. But I think the big thing I picked from him at that time was, I think when he was at Dar es Salaam University, he was a Marxist. But by 1984, he'd moved to the idea of a mixed economy.
Okay.
With, you know, capitalist elements, but also elements to protect ordinary people and ordinary Ugandans, so that you incentivize investors, but also try and raise the living standards of the people. So he'd moved to that idea of a mixed economy, and I was asking him, you know, people say you were a Marxist, and at that time the British Foreign Office in England had been trying to find out how left-wing Museveni was, and he said, look, I don't put me in those categories. I'll do a deal with the devil if it makes Uganda a better place. So he was really, I mean, he was that was a thing that many people in Europe, the British government was very frightened of Museveni, because he thought that he was a left-wing person who was going to nationalise all their businesses, their remaining businesses. And he was saying, no, that's not what I am. So that was also an important thing to discover at that time.
Yes. How did you, what happened after that? Did you, in the book you say that...
Well, so what happened, one thing that happened after that, what happened after that, because I'd walked for 110 kilometers in 2 days, and I hadn't come with proper walking shoes, because I didn't want, when I was going through immigration at Entebbe, to look like I wanted to look like an ordinary tourist, so I just had ordinary shoes. My feet had got very, very swollen, so my ankles were like this. If that's my ankle, it's my ankle's swollen up.
Yes.
So Museveni got me the doctor for Mobile Brigade to come and treat, and I got one of their precious bandages. They didn't have enough medical materials to reduce the swelling.
Yes.
So that doctor who reduced the swelling on my ankles was Kizza Besigye. So that's also in the book.
Yes.
So what happened after the interview is Museveni said, okay, it's time for you to go. Now, how do you think you got the strength to walk back with your bag legs? we could put you in a stretcher. I said, no, I'm not going in a stretcher.
So put you in a stretcher so that people can carry you?
Yeah. I said, no, that would be too humiliating.
Yeah.
And actually, no, I can manage, I can walk. Then we set off at about 7 o'clock in the evening. I don't know if viewers have seen the picture of Museveni standing in tall grass with an AK-47 on his shoulder, strap on his shoulder and a t-shirt.
Yeah. We actually have that on the show. I think it's going to be the scene, yes.
Yeah, so that picture I took about 1 minute before we set off walking back from Bulemezi to Kampala.
Tell me something. Having seen Museveni and done this interview, and now you seem to have a lot more information about the guy who was the mystery guy, but now no more a mystery person. What happened to the story? What did you do to the story?
So then we set off from Bulemezi, walked back to Kampala, but it took, we went back at a slower pace than the pace at which we had rushed to meet Museveni. Saw a lot of evidence of massacres. There were two things I wanted to do on this trip. One is to, as a journalist, I wanted to meet Museveni, get an interview with him. But then second was to see evidence of massacres. And unfortunately, or fortunately from a journalistic point of view, I saw a lot of evidence, thousands and thousands of skeletons. And there was overwhelming, there weren't many people in Luwero. I mean, there were maybe hundreds of people left in the northern part of, north of Luwero, but in the southern part of Luwero, it was, Matuga and all those areas, Muto, it was completely deserted. But in places like Kapeka, Matuga, Samuto, I saw so many skeletons and dead bodies. It was really tragic, and it made it very plausible that hundreds of thousands of people have died there. I think the estimates, the American government estimated 150,000 people had died. Yeah. So, but I thought maybe, from what I could see, it was even more. And the few people that were remaining there were unanimous that it was the government army, the UNLA soldiers that had done it. Because I think there's still a dispute today, were some of those people killed by the NRA?
Yeah.
But actually, on my trip, I was completely confident that this was all done by the UNLA.
Yeah.
And for instance, I met one chap who was a survivor. The story is in the book.
Yes.
And I think you can show the picture.
Yes, Mugerwa, who was...
Edward Mugerwa, I think his name was. Yeah, he had a big scar on his head.
Yes.
And he wasn't completely normal. He's someone like who's had a car crash and had head injury. He didn't talk very clearly, or he talked very slowly. But his story was that he'd been arrested on the street in Kampala, just in the Pandagari operation where they grabbed random people, took him to Makindye barracks, interrogated, then taken to Bombo barracks, then from Bombo barracks loaded onto a lorry and driven into the bush. And in the bush, as they got out of, there was about maybe 20 people in the lorry, as they got out, they were chopped on the back of the head with a panga. Chopped, that's why he had a big chop. But in his case, the chop hadn't killed him, but then he got dead bodies thrown on him. Whoa. And he woke up and he was still alive, but everyone else was dead. And then he crawled away, and he was found actually in Chalagonza. He was in Chalagonza's camp, Black Bomber. Then I asked, I said, can you take me to the place where you were dumped? Because you're trying to fact check.
Yes, of course.
Here's a story, but is it true?
Yeah.
So he took me to, with the guerrillas, they managed to find the place, and there was a pile of bodies, and every body
had a cut on the head.
A panga cut in the back of the head, which was evidence that his story was credible. Okay. That's the pictures and the story. That story is in the book. So we got all that dimension on the return journey to Kampala. Then you were asking about what happened to all the documents.
Yes.
Those were driven by, I was also very frightened now was I had pages of notes,
Yes.
which I'd written in tiny handwriting
Yes.
to minimize the amount of paper.
Yes.
So I still had pages and pages, plus 6 rolls of camera film.
Whoa.
Because in those days we didn't have digital cameras,
Yes.
you had to have physical film.
Yes.
Plus, I think 3 cassette tapes of Miss 70 talking.
Of audio. Yes.
Yeah, if I'd been caught with those, I would also have been killed.
Yes.
So those were handed over to Dr. Makumbi at Mulago Hospital, who was later the health minister
Yeah.
in NRM government. And he drove them to Nairobi and handed them over to Katagaya. And then Katagaya sent them by DHL to London. And then I got scared because by that time I'd been back in England for a month. And after taking all these risks, all my material for my story
We're not with you.
not
So,
with you, and I
yeah.
thought, shit, what am I going to do? Excuse
Yeah.
my language.
Yes.
If I lose it, everything will be wasted. Even the risks that the NRA took will have been wasted.
Yeah.
But fortunately it came. I wrote the story for The Observer. It became a big international story for various reasons and was splashed on newspapers all over the world. Bote called a cabinet meeting. How did this happen? They arrested the immigration officer who let me in and said, why did you let this man in? The immigration officer said, I didn't know, he's just a tourist.
Yes.
And actually, when I came back in January 1986, just after the capture of power,
Yeah.
he actually stamped my passport and told me that story. And he said, but don't worry, everything's okay.
It's
now."
okay now, yes. So that story actually is quite key for me right now because you have set so many people, including the British government, in the story. I got my hand on that whole story of the British government talked about a certain number of people who are dead, and it seems like your story brought out some dimensions that had to make people rethink the position of the killing in Uganda during the wartime and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
So what it was that the British government, it was actually a big controversy at that time as Amnesty International, the International Red Cross had released figures saying a lot of people were being killed because there were displaced people's camps.
Yes.
The biggest one was in Kapeka, and they were saying people were being taken out of the camps at night and killed. And then the British government issued a statement in around July 1984, around the time, actually August 1984, saying, no, actually it was, sorry, it was the American government issued a statement saying 150,000 people had died in Luwero in this violence, primarily at the hands of the government army. The British government said, nonsense, it's only 12,000 at the most.
Yes.
It's happening, yes, but not more than 12,000. So then I came back with evidence then, and I said, actually, not only is the British government wrong, but probably the American government is underestimating on the basis of what I've seen.
Yes.
So that's one reason why this became a global story. Because if you think of all the stuff about the Rohingya Muslims in Bangladesh now, that's a huge thing.
Yes.
Uganda was occupying a similar place in the world media in those days.
Yeah.
And if someone could come and quantify accurately how many Rohingya Muslims had been killed, now it would be a big story. So it was something like that. That's why it became a big story when I said, actually, no, there's evidence that it's even more than 150,000.
Yes, and so in that story, you account for that moment when you jump on your bicycle to ride to, I think, the university canteen or something like that, and then the newspaper finally arrived to the man who made the connection, Mr. Ben Matogo. What happened? What was the feeling?
You know, I used to ride a bicycle when I was in London, so I wrote The Observer newspaper on Saturday night, the night before it was coming out, and the story was coming out, and they gave me some copies of the paper. Then I went to Ben Matogo's, he lived in a council flat in Kentish Town in London, for people who know London. And I sat on his balcony, it was the summer, and I read out the story aloud.
I enjoyed that moment of you kind of reading the story loud so that this guy can hear.
And then he rang all the Ugandans in England saying, no, make certain you buy The Observer tomorrow. And that actually was something, it was, I think a kind of turning point in Uganda history in a way, because it changed the narrative from being a fringe bandits. Are they bandits, as Obote says? Are they just a few guys running around in the bush? Actually, no, it's an organized guerrilla army with a vision and a strategy. They're disciplined, they're committed. So the whole perspective on the NRA changed, and externally, not obviously internally, and externally, I think even Ugandans in England, for instance, started becoming much more supportive or believing much more in what was going on. So it was somehow a propaganda turning point for the NRA.
All right. So Ollie, right there, we're going on to a break, and when we come back, William Pike, Mr. William Pike, will be answering about 2 or 3 more questions about his story and what happened, and of course how did he end up back in Uganda and New Vision, and what happened after New Vision. All right, welcome back to the show. This is XXL Season 4, and of course on the hot seat, I like to call it, is Mr. William Pike, and we're catching and chatting and talking about the book, The Combatant, a memo of the Bush War and the press in Uganda, written by Mr. William Pike. And William, back in London, sat and read your story loud to Mr. Ben Matogo. And what happened after that? What next for you now?
Well, I got even more involved with NRA, NRM. I was always going to political meetings, talking about being in the bush, meeting people when they came to London, in Babzi, Katagaya, Rugunda, Kivijinja, all those people, plus lots of other Ugandans who are somehow now a bit forgotten. And then, so I also sort of, when I went in '84, I was a journalist, an independent journalist. But to be honest, after 1984 and going to the bush, I became a supporter journalist. I'd
not even allowed ethically as a journalist.
No, I think you know, you can have a right-wing journalist who's a supporter of Boris Johnson or Trump. It doesn't mean they write falsehoods. I mean, they can still write professionally, even if they're a sympathizer of Boris Johnson. So I was still professional and accurate, and I did a lot of writing and broadcasting as well, TV and radio, about the Bush War for the next 2 years, well, next year and a half, as the NRA gradually moved towards Kampala. And I remember Katagaya saying to me, if you strangle a snake until it dies, it is just as dead as if you cut its head off. So they were strangling the regime. They didn't move fast. And eventually they captured power in January '86. I'd visited the liberated zone in November, and by that stage, a lot of journalists were visiting them, but I'd also visited. And then after they captured power, my magazine, South, sent me to cover, interview Museveni again, now that he'd captured power, and write a story about what was happening. And I remember I left in early February to go back to London. And I remember looking out the window and seeing those big letters Entebbe on the grass bank of the airport, which unfortunately have now been removed, which I think is very sad.
It is.
But it's like having Hollywood in Los Angeles. Entebbe should still be at the airport on the bank, in my view. So I remember looking at those Entebbe letters and feeling very sad. This is the last time I'm going to see Uganda. It's all over. They don't need me anymore. I've done my part. But then, in about maybe 1 or 2 months later, in about March 1986, I was sitting at my desk in the office of South Magazine, which was a big glass building, tall glass building right next to Trafalgar Square. And the phone goes, and it was Katagaya. And Katagaya said, "The cabinet has just met, and we would like to offer you the job of being editor of our new newspaper, The New Vision. Would you like to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I would like to do it, but can you give me 24 hours to make a decision?" And then I could tell Katagaya was annoyed that I hadn't said yes immediately, but I needed...
Well, because they felt they owned you now, right?
Yeah, something like maybe.
Yeah.
But anyway, to cut a long story short, I was very excited. And, you know, I rang back 24 hours later, less than 24 hours, and said, "Okay, I'm really happy, I'll do it." And then, yeah, then I came out, I think twice before in the next few months, and started helping at New Vision. And then in July '84, I started full time at July '86, and started full time at the New Vision. And
This
was
is when, 1994?
86. So this was, Katagaya rang me 2 months after Power, and the cabinet decided to set up a newspaper, which they were calling New Vision. And so
What happened to the Uganda Argus?
the Uganda Argus collapsed, and then the building is now owned by New Vision, but a new paper was set up called the Uganda Times, I think, which was in a different building to the Uganda Argus. And but that also, young people wouldn't remember, but the nickname was Uganda Sometimes, because it didn't always come out. It was very erratic. The New Vision started using the equipment that had been bought for Uganda Times, Russian equipment. Then I came out and started work. So I worked at New Vision from July 1986 until December 2006. So that was 20 years, almost 20, just over 20 years.
You are credited quite a bit for reshaping the media, particularly the print media or the press in Uganda.
You know, this is a country that's being rebuilt. So the roads were fixed, the electricity was fixed, the water was fixed. So you could say also the media was fixed. So I wouldn't necessarily take credit. It was, I think, I was part of a process that was going on. But I think what is true is that many people thought a government newspaper was doomed to failure, because I was not the first choice to be the editor of the New Vision. The first choice was an NRM leader called Bukulu Mpaji, but he was too sick and he passed away, I think, in 1986. The second choice was Wafula Gutu, at that time the editor of Weekly Topic, later the editor of The Monitor, and later leader of the opposition. And Wafula was asked to be the editor because he'd done a great job with Charles Abo of running the Weekly Topic in 1985 period after the Okello coup, when it was the main independent newspaper. And they asked him to be the editor. He said, no, I can't be the editor. A government newspaper can never succeed in Uganda. I think that shows how things had changed, that a government newspaper could be more popular than a private newspaper. It's actually a lot to do with the government allowing freedom of speech, allowing criticism as well as praise. It was a good time to be a journalist. And right now I'm in Nairobi, in Kenya, where the press is pretty free. But in the 1990s, the Ugandan press was so much freer than the Kenyan press. We actually felt sorry for the Kenyans because Kenyans had to keep their mouths shut, and the media was also muzzled. So it was a very good time to be a journalist, and everything was going up in quality in the media. So it was a privilege to me to be a part of that and to be able to use my professional skills to help build the new vision.
All right, and so probably this is your last or maybe second last questions to end this interview. And of course, William will be back on the show. You can be sure of that, because I don't think you're going to get a lot more of this man on the show today, and particularly on this one that we're on right now. So William, let's talk about something that most people don't know how it happens. Leaving the new vision where you have been for 20 plus years. On that note, by the way, I'll give you a cup of coffee so that you can answer this question quite well.
To give me strength.
Yes.
To answer the question.
To answer the question, and perhaps some caffeine if there are some hard parts that needs to be patched together.
A shot in the arm.
Tell me about the new vision, leaving. Some critics say that you felt you left when you're not yet ready to leave, or the state stopped listening to you as the editor or as the CEO at the time. What happened?
I think it's true that the president, Museveni, had become dissatisfied with the way New Vision was. Because I always believed that you should, if something's going wrong, put it out there, you know, expose it. Because if you expose something that's wrong, it gives you a chance to fix it. You know, I was still an NRM supporter. I was very invested in the NRM project. So New Vision was still pro-NRM, but it was really a question of how much should you wash dirty linen in public. And because I'm a journalist, and you're a journalist, we journalists always think, put everything in the open. And that's the best for any country. And I think Museveni thought that sometimes, you know, reflects badly and gives a bad image to the country, especially if a foreign head of state is visiting or something. So there were various minor incidents, nothing really major. And so I think in the end he decided it was time for me to go.
When you say he decided it was time for me to go, were you fired, William? Or?
No, I wasn't fired, I resigned. But they told me, Noble Mayombo, for those who remember Brigadier Noble Mayombo, who was the head of intelligence, and also the chairman, military intelligence, but also later the chairman of, he was, I think, the permanent secretary of Ministry of Defense, and also chairman. He was very brilliant, and I really liked him, and I always got on very well with him. And I didn't have any problem with him at all. But when he was appointed chairman of New Vision, that was about a year before I left. I knew things are getting tight. Then we met at the Sheraton. He asked me to go for a meeting at the Sheraton. It's a long story. I tell it in the book. But he said we're going to set up a commission of inquiry into New Vision, because a Belgian journalist who Museveni had asked me to appoint as an editor, who I had appointed as an editor, claimed that she discovered a conspiracy against government inside the New Vision, based on no evidence at all. Actually, she became Elster Timmerman. She became the editor after I left.
Was she just looking after your job?
I think so. I think so. I can't think of another explanation, because her evidence of the conspiracy was that sometimes her stories were cut. But if you're a journalist, your stories are always cut.
Yes, of course.
And Mayombo said, we're setting up a commission of inquiry, and we want you to stand aside while the commission of inquiry is underway. But Noble, do you want me to resign? I mean, I'm happy to resign. If you don't want me anymore, just ask me to resign. I'll resign.
Yes. Don't just look for any other thing.
And then Noble said, really? I said, of course. If you don't want me, why should I struggle to stay? And so, actually, the whole conversation turned. We just discussed how I would resign. I gave 3 months' notice. So that was in September or October. Gave 3 months' notice, worked my notice, arranged to hand over to Robert Kabushenga and else. And that was that. But the very important point, Eddie, is that I was not unhappy. Actually, in a way, I was relieved, because being a newspaper editor, as I'm sure Kabushenga knows now, is amazing amount of political pressure, and you're walking a tightrope all the time. Balance this complaint with that necessity. How do you navigate all these treacherous seas?
Yes, I'm actually thinking that there has been a joke in the corridors of Kampala that, or corners of Kampala, that Robert is always not walking straight. He doesn't know which landmine is going to.
Yeah, but that was the same. That was the same for me. If you're in that job, and even I'm sure Kalinaki and the guys at Monitor have the same problem. They also have to walk the tightrope. So actually, it was a relief to get off. Plus, the very important thing is that I'd worked at the New Vision for 20 years in the top job. That's a really long time. And I think President Museveni legitimately could have thought maybe another manager can do a better job. I mean, if you own a business, the government owned New Vision to a majority of the shares, any business, you think, maybe I should get another managing director for this business, because maybe we need to go in a new direction or reinvigorate the business. So it's completely legitimate for President Museveni and the government to actually decide, let's get a new manager for the New Vision. I didn't feel, I felt a relief. I didn't have the political pressure anymore. I mean, obviously a bit sad, but not destroyed. And I also thought, fair enough, it's been a privilege to work here for 20 years. I'm not sad. I mean, I was sad that I was leaving, but I'm not angry at all. And actually, it was a chance for a new beginning for myself to do some different things. And it had been a privilege. I was really proud to have worked at New Vision for 20 years. And it had also been a great experience. And it had been a great experience working with Museveni and Mayomba and all those other people. I didn't feel bitter with anyone. I really want that to be understood. Yes. I actually was happy that I had the chance to work with all these people.
Well, and I think that, so there was no settling any scores from what I see, right?
No.
And so I spent a lot of time, William, with people in the gym. I like to work out, I like to keep fit, I like to be healthy.
And by the way, everyone should work out and stay healthy. Which I also still try and do.
Yeah, so in my daily work of gym and stuff like that, I meet up with so many CEOs who are struggling in their offices, in their jobs, and a whole lot of people out there who don't know how to go about it. It's not about money, but so the only time we get free to discuss serious stuff, whether you're a general or or presidential advisor, the moment we get into the steam, everybody losing up.
Yeah.
Because the heat just this away brings down everybody's.
And you only have a towel on. You don't have clothes. Yes.
For lack of a better word, and so we tend to get free. So we were discussing your book. And by the way, that's the spring or the root of this interview. I met a couple of people.
Yeah, I think the book is over there. Yes. Competence, available in Aristoc and Entebbe Airport Bookshop.
Yes.
And also, I think this cafe, Rosaho, this cafe in Naguru is going to stock it.
Yes. And so somebody said, have you read William Pike's book, the new book? I said, yeah, I did. And it says, is the guy trying to settle scores with the state? Does he feel like the state he once served as, let his hand loose or something? Is there something holding? I said, oh, by the way, that's a good thing. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I'm going to do an interview. I'm going to look for William and just try and do his interview and find out if this book coming at this point of time is actually settling scores. Can you clear that?
It's definitely not settling scores. And as I explained to you at the beginning,
would you like
no, I'm fine. I had the manuscript for the first 14 chapters. So the 15th chapter, which was the roundup of how I left New Vision, was just really to put everything in context. it's definitely not settling scores. But actually, as I said earlier, I'm not bitter. I really just felt it was a privilege to be allowed to work at New Vision and to live in Uganda, and actually now to have a Ugandan passport as well. Actually, the motivation was different. The real motivation was, it will be a tragedy if this history is forgotten. Because what the NRA did in the bush was very extraordinary. They captured power without any external support. From 1981 to 1985, they had no external support. Colonel Gaddafi in Libya gave 1,000 guns, which were shared in 1981, which were shared between the NRA and Andrew Kaira and UFN. But that's all the support they got in 5 years. They had no external base. They couldn't run into Kenya or Congo or Sudan for hiding. They were stuck in the middle of Uganda in Luwero. To take power without an external base and without external support, it's actually something Ugandans should be very proud of. They shouldn't think this is just Museveni propaganda. It was actually a very big thing. Only China and Cuba have had successful revolutions that captured state power without external support, that were purely internal. On Twitter, I've had a discussion with someone. He said, no, Nyerere gave guns to the NRA. But Tanzania gave guns to the NRA after July 1985, after the coup that brought Tito and Basilio Okello to power, when it was obvious to any deep analyst that eventually the NRA was going to capture power. So they were only supporting NRA as the government started to crumble and collapse. And NRA would still have captured power without those guns. When Western Uganda, the liberated zone, came up, you could then go in and out of Uganda from Rwanda. They had a rear base. But until that liberated zone was set up, there was no rear base. You couldn't just walk from the guerrilla area into the neighboring country. So that is really historically important and a very amazing achievement. And it's something that shouldn't be forgotten. So that actually was my primary motivation. NRM, the Bush War, or the NRM Revolution, or whatever you call it, the roots, the genesis of it should not be forgotten.
So you have heard it from William himself, the author, the writer of the book, that clearly spells out the reason behind the book. I personally think that the book is very okay. I think that you have settled scores in another way, in my opinion, by opening up. There are a lot of books that were written about the NRA war and, you know, the Bush War with President Museveni's government and the likes. But much of them were almost leaning towards telling the story of, you know, that pleases the system itself. But your book seems to be otherwise, telling, you know, the story that seems to be more open to different aspects and gives a lot more perspective compared to the rest of the books that we've read. I've read many of the books, and I think many people out there agree with me that your book is quite open. And
what I tried was it's a first-hand eyewitness account.
yes.
So I tried to write it without just saying what I saw, without putting too much interpretation into it.
Yes. And I think that's a good thing about this book. So you need to go to Aristoc and find this book, or go to Entebbe. Where in Entebbe?
In the airport, in the departure area.
In the Departure Lounge, you can find
Entebbe Airport Bookshop.
All right, so you can go to the Departure Lounge at Entebbe International Airport and find a copy of the book there. And we just thought about it, bring it closer to you in Naguru at Rosaho. Go there and ask for the copy of the book.
And have a cup of coffee.
And have a cup of coffee as well, like we do having right now with William. So, William, as we wind up this interview, there are young people in this country you've been in this country long.
Yeah.
You narrate the story that I myself am amazed of. I wasn't there, I wish I was there to witness. But our story in Uganda today as young people is very little belief in the young people. Unfortunately, by our elders, both in the system and those who are not in the system. And you are now an elder in our society. What is your best advice to the elders and to the young people? How do we do it? How did you do it?
I think Rome was not built in a day. It takes a long time to build a society.
There, William. When you say it is a very difficult question, how old is your son?
My son is 28.
Yeah, so your son falls within our age group. Do you want to say it's difficult for you to tell him?
No, but you see, anyway, my son has, he's now working in America. So he has, there's jobs available. There's a shortage of jobs in Uganda. I don't know what the solution is. If I was running the government, I would like to see a much bigger investment in education, health services and agriculture, to the exclusion of many, like prioritize those things to the maximum. And then for young people, I think young people should, this may be too late for some people, but for people who are still at school, get technical training, get technical skills, practical skills. Because management jobs and white collar jobs, there's not enough of them. So get trained as an electrician. I just had to pay this morning 1 million shillings to an electrician to fix something. And he looked...
At your house?
Yeah. So the guy, he looks quite, he's a nice guy, but but he's prosperous, he's fat, but he's a technical guy. He was wearing an electrician's yellow jacket. So I think you can do better very often if you have practical skills. And I'm actually, one thing that makes me happy about Kabushenga is the way he's with his farm. He's promoting agriculture as a way to make a good living as well. So for young people, I think keep on struggling. But then I think for young people, as a word of caution, I understand why young people always want to struggle for justice and a better world, but think the grass is not always greener on the other side of the hill. Sometimes it is,
yes,
but very often it's not.
Yes, but was that the same during your time?
Oh, when I was growing up as a young man?
Yeah,
but you see, you also have to remember I grew up in, but my father was a colonial officer, and then we were in England. My father was middle class. So I always had a privileged upbringing and good education. Hadn't started off as a middle class person with a few extra resources. I probably wouldn't have got where I was today. So I'm privileged in that respect. I understand what a struggle it is for young people here. Although the young people should make perhaps a bigger effort to understand what the government is capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing.
Okay. So in other words, you're saying that be wise, don't just wait for government to do everything for you.
Yeah.
You have got to go out there and do something for yourself. That's what you're saying.
Yes, but then government should also see how it can help, in which way.
All right, so last question. There is a man who speaks very highly of you. And you speak very nicely of how and where New Vision is today. But there's a guy called Joseph Kabuleta, who every time something goes wrong, we all see New Vision is prone to making certain very, open mistakes that you wouldn't see during the time of Mr. William Pike, New Vision. And every time such comes out, Kabuleta always hit hard and say, the legacy of William Pike is dead. What do you have to say about that?
What I think is
that you're just a fanatic?
No, I think what's happened to all newspapers in the world is that the digital revolution has massively reduced advertising revenue. And whereas in the old days you could have a big desk of sub-editors doing corrections, making certain the story is perfect, you could afford to pay top salaries to the best writers. Now, newspapers all over the world have economized, and actually, not necessarily in the New York Times, but in many regional newspapers in Europe or America, you'll find spelling mistakes and errors because newspapers are having to downsize their staffs and are struggling, really. Even the Star, the newspaper I work on in Nairobi, there's been a lot of downsizing of staff numbers, and it's really a challenge to produce a quality newspaper under those conditions. So I think that's not so much to do with me, Mr. Cabaletta, as to do with the changing economic environment of newspapers.
Okay, I needed that to be cleared so that you have heard it from William Pike. And William, what's your parting shots if you were to advise the president? By the president, I mean your very good former friend, still present friend, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, and of course everyone in government who are your contemporaries. What would be your that one statement of advice that you think will change the world in Uganda?
Well, if we go back to the beginning of the NRM period in Uganda, I remember the masthead of the New Vision. It said the New Vision on top, and underneath it said, "For a better Uganda." So the first thing is, whenever and people in that period, the 86, 95 period, that first 10 years, people were really struggling to rebuild the country and a lot of personal sacrifice and a lot of personal effort. Let's see if we can stick to that, always be asking ourselves, is this what we're doing now, is that for a better Uganda? And then secondly, there was also a principle that Museveni introduced in the Bush War, that a junior soldier, private, could openly criticize an officer without getting into trouble, as long as he did it in public, in good faith, not as backbiting or fitina. That was called the principle of constructive criticism. Let's also not forget that principle of constructive criticism. Let's have open debate about whether something is good or bad for the country, and without fear or favor, and let's accept criticism if we're in a position of power as well.
All right. And William, assuming today your old friend decides to say, is fond of calling his old friends back into the system, recently called Mr. Kivizinja back to government, and he's now riding on a 2016 Mercedes-Benz. If the call comes today and say, William, you need you back to service, what will happen? Would you leave the Star?
You know, I'm 67 years old now, and my thoughts have turned to retirement, not to staying on a ranch with longhorn and Kole cattle, but what I would like to do is, I like painting, so I'd like to do less work and do more painting.
All right. And so you, in other words, you're saying you won't take up the job?
I would prefer to do my painting. So I think most probably not.
Yes. So if you are, so would you paint for us a picture of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni right now as you head towards your retirement? If we give you a brush.
My painting style would take a bit more time than that. I'm not a cartoonist.
Yes.
But yeah, sure, one day I could paint you a picture.
Yes.
Of
All right.
Museveni.
Great. So you have heard it from William. So what is that one parting shot that if I see this interview, you'll make me laugh and I will remember you for the rest of my life if I'm watching this program?
No, I don't think I have a parting shot, but let me just say, oh Uganda, may God uphold thee.
All right. Thank you very much. You've heard it from Mr. William Pike. The book is at Aristoc, and you can find it at the Entebbe Departure Lounge and as well as at Rosaho in Naguru. Make the booking. I can tell you that book is not anywhere at the moment. It's finished. I am told and privileged that there's about 150 copies coming to Uganda. I don't know if you can get yourself a hold of one of them. Otherwise, keep it XXL. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you, William, and I look forward to bringing William back to the show. He's still a strong man, but he's refusing to take the appointment. and we're told, by the way, that President Museveni said he's going to make a memo on your book. Somebody told me this is true.
That's what he rang me to say he liked the book and he was going to make some notes and then call me to discuss it with him. And
So-
I look forward to that.
So this time you didn't disagree like you always argue and agree.
No. And I think he liked the book. He liked it, but that's the good thing.
All right. So we will bring William back here if we hear that President Museveni has actually called and met with William. I would like to know what the two old friends have talked about. 40 years old, meeting 32, and now you're 65?
67.
67 versus 74, 75?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to hear how that conversation goes. Otherwise, thank you very much for being part of the show. Looking forward to catching up with you. This is the book review. And next, we will be talking to William about retirement and how he will paint the picture of Uganda and his former friend. Next week, same time, same place. God bless.
You see, it's like a ship. You just talked about a ship. A ship without a compass in an ocean or in a lake will go anywhere. It has no sense of direction, no timing of where it's going and when it will get there or whatever. Leadership begins as a personal thing. The reason why we have a society that is getting messed up with so many things happening and we're seeing corruption happening is because leadership is failing from a personal level. You are corrupt as an individual and you pride in it because you're gaining more. You go home, your children are seeing that and thinking that is the way of life. Community and society is saying, this guy is a good guy, he's a rich guy, he's the man of society. And society is now beginning to agree to that being a norm. That's not where the problem starts. So let's just go back to your question. Leadership begins from your personal compass, your true north. Why are you on earth? What's your purpose? When you walk out of here, how do you impact on people? Or how do you want people to remember you? You know, nowadays people are dying and all people can say is, you know, we had a good time with that guy. But beyond that, what next? And then you find the same people coming to bury you, then after that they even actually have a drink up after that and life goes on. You'll never be remembered. But just think about this, and let me just give you a simple example of Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a 4-foot lady, very short lady. She was a teacher. You know, people think teachers have no impact. She was a teacher. On her way to school to teach, she was so disturbed by the number of young children who were hungry on the streets, having no sense of direction. One day, she just woke up, went to the principal and said, you know what? Kalas, I'm done. I am going to feed the children of the world. The principal laughed. He said, you small woman, first of all, what money do you have? You think feeding the world is? But when you think of Mother Teresa today, what do you think of? The woman who tried to feed the world. Her mission still exists way beyond her. Going back to the same principle of people. People and purpose. And you see, purpose cannot be from outside or without. You know, you don't tell me that this is your purpose or Toa. No, it comes from within. And you know, leaders are very crazy people. Yeah? You know, it's the same Museveni who read a newspaper and he got pissed off and went and, you know, on the streets and went and joined the bush. Yeah. They talk about people like Fidel Castro and all these people who... Leaders are people who just get angry with what is happening and make a commitment to make a difference.
Welcome to the CEO Bench. My name is Eddie Okila, and of course, coming back from the holiday breaks, how are you guys doing? How is everyone doing? Is your CEO back in office? They're supposed to be back on the 15th of January or around about the end of January, okay? And of course, we took a break with them for the Easter, rather the Christmas holidays and the happy holidays. Everyone welcoming you all the way from the 2021, the year that was very tough, to the new year 2022. My guest returning on the show today for the very first time 2022 is the man who has been around the e-commerce, you know, and of course, you know, computer science and technology and all these things we talk about. He's been in that space for some time. He's a man known to many of you across. He's the representative or the team leader for Flutterwave Inc. in East Africa. Nielsen,
yes.
Welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
yes,
much.
I'd even forgotten to pronounce your name.
You are too busy.
Yes.
Too ambitious.
No, because I'm trying to look for the name. That's how far and how long it has been. Yes,
I know. Happy to be here.
Happy to see you
it's
too.
Been a long time coming, but
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of you know, requests to bring the young CEO on the show, and we said yes. We will definitely look for him, and I think at the time when the nominations came, we were going for holidays,
right.
And we decided we'll wait for the holiday to end and then bring you on.
Awesome.
Well, we're happy to have you here. How's the family? How's work and everybody else?
Awesome.
Great.
Yes.
We're going to dive into our interview very quickly. The CEO Bench is a program that focuses on young leaders or old leaders or people who are in the position of leadership or climbing into position of leadership. We want to share the nuggets of truth about the journey of self-leadership into that position or into that space.
Right.
And you know, how has it been? Has it been easy? I mean, people just see sometimes CEOs on the streets and you know, on television or wherever they have been, and they think that it's easy to get there. Right. But some of them are going by the baptism of fire. We think that you are not different from them, and there could be some really serious fire going on in your life.
Yeah.
And we want to share it out. So we'll start from a lighter note by just getting to know you. So who is Nelson Msango? Are you Ugandan? If yes, what are the values that define you as Ugandan?
Yeah.
Yes, and how did you end up in this space?
Yeah. So my name is Neil Msango.
Yeah.
Ugandan, pure Ugandan, 100% Ugandan. You know, born and bred in this country, but with a passion for technology. Of course, the first core value for me is fear of God. You know, I really love God, and everything I do, He has to manifest. And because of God, it's excellence. You know, and that's how, you know, in everything I do, I really try to give it my very best. I believe, you know, that everyone is built with some, you know, something inside of them that they can, you know, refine and bring out to the very best. And so, you know, that was my journey. Fell in love with technology at a young age. Was blessed to have parents, Ugandan parents, who allowed me to explore that journey. Very important, you know. So my mother, you know, allowed me really to explore my passion. And, you know, I just dived in. And when I was diving in on that journey, I realized that, you know, there is no one who has gone. Few guys have gone before us. And so it called out for a trailblazer, someone to go and make a path where there has been no path. And, you know, throughout that entire time, learning of how I can make myself better, because it's important. Every year, you know, when the year is beginning, people make resolutions. And normally it's, you know, it's regarding other people, they are competing. But myself, it's every year, how do I become better? How do I become better? And never ever set out to actually be a leader, but leaders. You know, for me, I like saying that cometh the hour, cometh the man. Right? Yeah, a space where no one is taking that step to go ahead.
Yeah.
You know, and you're willing to dive into that kind of self-education.
Yeah.
Then I end up becoming, whenever I'd be in a circle,
Yeah.
I'd be elected and chosen to lead. And when when you're leading people, you have to know. So there's automatically sitting on a hot seat. So just went on that journey of learning beyond technical skills, just learning how to lead people, how to manage people, how to strategize, how to get a vision, how to look forward beyond just look beyond yourself as a leader. And throughout that journey, reached where I am today.
Wow.
Quite interesting.
Well, I want to take a moment to welcome you guys to the show. We're live on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. You can go there, share far and wide, and be part of this conversation. I promise you this is going to be a good ride for you. And of course, if you have a neighbor who is interested in growing in the technology space to, become like Neil Simsango, that's a place for you to be right now. Neil?
Yes.
I want to start from that point. You've talked about leadership,
right.
And I want to just know from you, what is your understanding of leadership?
Right, it's an interesting question, right? And like I said, I think I made something, subtle hint that, I always believed initially when I was growing up that leaders were born.
Yeah.
Now, I believe that people are born with some qualities of leadership, but leaders are actually, they're made. And so leadership for me is being able to take that step, right? To go to a place where people have not been, so that you can go there, learn, come back, and then take people there.
Yeah.
So, that means that to be a leader, you must have people who are following you. So you can't lead, you know what I'm saying? Some of the things that I've learned recently, over the years, really recently, is that, for you to be a leader, people must be following you. And so leader for me is going to a place and then learning how to get there and then coming and taking people along that journey to that place. But then the thing is that as you go to that place and take people there, when people you must be able to continue to go to another place. So it's developing yourself to learn to see those places, go to those places, and then take people to those places. And then becoming as well.
Wow.
Yeah. So you must be following someone, and you must have people who are following you as well.
Wow. And that's a very interesting perspective right there, Neil. We are looking at today on the show with you. We're definitely going to be looking at the leaders' transformative leadership approach.
Right.
And of course, we're looking at the leadership abilities, which are often what we look for to determine the level of effectiveness of a leader.
Right.
What is your level of effectiveness? Is it correlated to your leadership abilities?
Right.
I mean, if you don't have a certain ability, then you can't lead self.
Right.
So on that note, are you a leader?
I am. 100%.
Yes. And what kind of a leader do you think you are?
And this is a question that has been going through my mind in the past years, because you get to a level, and I know Eddie because we're personal friends. I know that you've been in that space and we've had these conversations, but throughout life you get to a level where it stops becoming about you. Right. And at that level is then when many people realize that, and some don't, and the thing is, when you reach that level where it stops becoming about you, the purpose of what you're doing grows beyond self, right? And that's the point where now innately you're built to be in that place of leadership. Now, the thing which also is clear to me as I tell you what kind of leader I am is, for me, the key thing for me in everything I do in my leadership is the people I lead. And so I like to refer to myself as an empathetic leader. So it's, again, understanding.
Empathetic leader.
Yes. It's understanding the kind of people I am leading, whatever space, seeing how I can bring value to them, and then picking from them what I can learn for myself, and then using those learnings to help them go on that journey to go to the place where I want to go.
Well, again, we're talking to Neil Simsango, and of course, our topic of discussion today, we're going to be looking into the leadership, transformative leadership in the e-commerce space in Uganda and across East Africa. He is the lead for Flutterwave Inc. in East Africa, and of course, Flutterwave is an e-commerce platform that allows business to trade and transact and to transfer payment from one end to the next end. If you're in goods and services or in trade, that's the place to be. And talking of that, Neil, you have defined leadership and you've talked about what leadership is to you and the type of leader you are. What is self-leadership to you? A lot of us out there don't know what self-leadership is. You ask the person, says, I don't know how to lead myself to get myself to this point. What is self-leadership to you? And how can you actually, you know, define it for somebody who doesn't know, given the fact that you have been walking this journey to where we are now?
Right. And I think that's a key question, right? Which many leaders don't ever ask themselves, right? Because sometimes people end up being in places of leadership positions, but actually not leaders.
True.
And for me, you know, what I believe is that to lead others to a place where you want them to be, you must have gone there yourself. And so self-leadership for me becomes then, what does it take for you as an individual to get to the place, you know, where you want to be? And those things, it's a big part of it is reflection. Knowing thyself, right? I think that was in the Art of War. You have to know thyself, right? And so it's to look at yourself from, you know, end to end, A to Z, and figuring out, you know, who am I? What am I good at? Extremely good at. What am I not good at? What do I need to do to make sure that the things I'm good at, I become even better? And the things that I'm not good at, what do I need to do today to make sure that I become better at those things? Who do I need around me? Who do I need to, where do I need to move from in terms of spaces and circles? You know, who are the people who have the qualities that I want to have? How do I go to connect and interface with those people? You know, and that's a big part of it, is being mentored, right? And so it's just knowing exactly where you are, being self-aware really of where you are at any given point in time, and then doing the things. Because it's one thing to know, and I tell you, it's
a thing to do.
Yes, I tell you, I was telling some a couple of young people who are a leader, you know, over the weekend, that look, it's one thing to know what to do. That's the first step. The biggest thing is then to do what you know how to do. Wow.
That's a big challenge right there, which many of us struggle with. Neil, I want to take you a little bit just back, you know, to as a child. How did you end up in, you know, in ICT? And was any of your parents into this space, or an uncle, somebody will always say, where did you pick your inspiration from? And going through school and getting to this, did you always see that this is where I'm going to end up? You know, we just want to know that bit, because it connects to self-leadership that we're talking about. I mean, if you're able to pick yourself from point A to point B, chances are we're going to find you in point Y, you know, at the later stage in life. And that is because there's been certain level of motivation towards that. Would you share that?
So, you know, growing up, I was, I'm a middle child, so number 2 of 3. And I believe greatly that that also, you know, harnessed my skills of being a leader, because then over the time the middle child is forgotten. So, you know, there's the firstborn who is the firstborn, then there's the baby who's the baby, then there's the middle child. But also because of that, you know, you're able to be a mediator, because the firstborn is, you know, is the leader who is born leadership, and the baby is fighting for that power. And so you have to learn to manage people. But, you know, going to the ICT question, I remember my father, he came back from one of his trips with a computer, desktop computer, and, you know, with a couple of books, but no one knew how to use it. You know, not himself, not the people at his office. And so I just began to